You always wanted to save the world, Rachel, Ethan once joked. But maybe try saving your bank account first. My name is Rachel Lynn, and I'm 26 years old. 2 years ago, I did something no one in my family or social circle believed I could. I quit my job, remortgaged my apartment, and maxed out every credit card I had to launch a startup focused on mental health. I had a vision, something raw, burning, relentless. It wasn't about becoming the next tech darling. It wasn't about status. It was personal. My father died by suicide when I was 21. He was brilliant, funny, and unbreakable in everyone's eyes. But depression doesn't show up in bruises or broken bones. It hid in our quiet dinners and missed birthdays, in his 1,000-yard stare and that final silence that still echoes in my bones. No one saw it coming. No one even knew to look. I wanted to build something that would catch people like him before it was too late. So I created Wellnest, a hybrid wellness tech company offering affordable, personalized mental health and coaching services. Therapy without the red tape. Real human coaches, not cold apps. Community, not just checkboxes. At first, it was just me, sleeping 4 hours a night, coding through meals, working 2-day jobs to fund a dream I couldn't afford. I handled customer support, built wireframes, negotiated vendor contracts, and even mopped the floors of our tiny WeWork rental because I couldn't spare the money for cleaning services. I was the janitor and the CEO, the voice behind every support chat and the developer behind every update. 2 years in, when I had finally managed to secure a small pre-seed round and 3 paying clients, I hired Ethan. Ethan Chung was my cousin, 29, fresh out of Harvard Business School with that annoying glow some men wear like armor. He showed up at my apartment that smelled like instant ramen and old socks, wearing a Moncler jacket and using words like synergy and vertical alignment before he even took his shoes off. But he smiled like he believed in me, in Wellnest, in what I'd built with my blood and insomnia. "You've done the impossible," he told me the first week. "Now let's scale it." For a while, he was exactly what I needed: charismatic, organized, and good in rooms I hated being in. Investors responded to his suits. Journalists liked his soundbites. He brought in a developer I couldn't afford and negotiated a new office lease in downtown LA. The first time someone referred to him as my co-founder, I let it slide. We were a team, after all. But that's when the shift began. It started in meetings, Ethan slowly taking over presentations, answering questions directed at me with polished charm and subtle condescension. "Rachel's brilliant with the emotional stuff," he'd say. "She really gets the human side. I handle operations, the big picture things." As if empathy and intellect couldn't coexist. As if I hadn't written the damn business plan, line by line, in a Denny's at 3 a.m. while waiting tables. He began calling me the face of the brand in public, always with a warm grin, always with the implication that he was the engine behind it. That I was the mascot and he was the architect. I tried to talk to him about it once, during a late night when we were both wired on caffeine and tension. "Ethan, it's starting to feel like you're erasing my part in this," I said. He laughed and looked up from his laptop. "Don't take it personally, Rach. You know how these rooms work. People need a clean narrative, brains and heart. We're the full package." I told myself he meant well. That he didn't realize how much it hurt. That maybe he was right. I let it slide. I let too much slide. Because Ethan was family. And for all the betrayals I expected in business, I never thought it would come from blood. If I had known then what I know now, I would have kept the company entirely in my name. I wouldn't have given him partial equity in exchange for consulting. I wouldn't have let him handle the bank accounts, or investor relations, or the PR firm that suddenly referred to me as a founding partner instead of the founder. A tiny shift in language. A giant shift in truth. Meanwhile, outside of Wellnest, I was carrying the weight of my family's fragility. My mom's rent? I paid it. Ethan's student debt? I co-signed it. When my sister had a medical emergency last year, it was my savings that saved her. Every birthday, every crisis, every late-night phone call from relatives needing just a little help, Rachel was the answer. Always. But when I spoke about stress or exhaustion or needing space, the response was always the same: "You're too intense. You care too much. Don't be so emotional." Even Ethan once laughed when I cried after we lost a client to a competitor. "You've got to toughen up," he said, sipping matcha like it was wisdom. They wanted me to be a martyr and a machine. And I played my part. Until I couldn't anymore. 3 days before my 30th birthday, I opened an email from a potential Series A investor, the kind that could take Wellness national. Except it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Ethan Chung, founder and CEO, Wellness Incorporated. The pitch deck attached didn't have my name. Not even in the footer. My heart didn't just break. It calcified. The man I had lifted into this company, the cousin I had trusted with my vision, had begun pitching my company as his, to investors I had nurtured for years. That night, I sat alone in our office staring at the walls, still covered with sticky notes I wrote in the early days. I stared at the faint grease stain from the time I spilled pho on my code-based printout. I stared at the corner where I once slept under a desk because I couldn't afford a commute. I stared at all of it. And I knew. This was the first brick. Not the one that built the company, but the one I would tear it down with, if I had to. You've always been the heart of this place, Rachel. But sometimes the heart needs rest. Let us handle things now. That was the sentence Ethan said to me the day he fired me from my own company. Calm, rehearsed, and so gentle it almost sounded like mercy. But it wasn't mercy. It was a scalpel, wielded by someone who knew exactly where to cut. I was 31, and 3 weeks out of the hospital. I hadn't checked my email in a month. My therapist, and eventually my doctor, had warned me I was close to collapse, and I hadn't believed them until I fainted in the middle of a product roadmap meeting. I remember the floor being cold. I remember Carla screaming my name. I remember Ethan kneeling beside me and whispering, "It's okay. We've got this." I had believed him. For the first time in years, I had allowed myself to rest. They called it Rachel's recovery phase. Ethan told the board I was on a brief mental health sabbatical, inspiring and necessary, for a company built around wellness. I should have seen it as the start of a coup. But I didn't. I saw it as kindness, as family. During that time, Ethan stepped into my role fully, not temporarily, not symbolically, but absolutely. He began introducing himself to stakeholders as founder and CEO. He reassured our lead investors that I was taking much-needed time to heal, while he steered the ship. He even changed our About page, replacing my detailed bio with a short paragraph about me being on extended medical leave, and including a flattering photo I'd never approved. What I didn't know was that during my first week in the hospital, he'd convened an emergency board meeting and presented a temporary transfer of voting control, for legal continuity. What I also didn't know was that the convertible note round I had greenlit months earlier had quietly converted into equity, massively diluting my share of the company. Our legal team, people I had hired, had failed to flag the caveats in the clauses. Or maybe they hadn't failed at all. Maybe they had been told not to. I returned to the office exactly 41 days after I collapsed, wearing my best navy blazer and holding homemade muffins for the team. It sounds ridiculous now, but I was genuinely excited to be back, to rejoin the world I had built with my sweat and tears. I didn't realize until I stepped out of the elevator that my keycard no longer worked. That was the first red flag. The second came moments later, when Carla met me in the lobby with a look that made my stomach twist. She smiled too brightly, the kind of smile people wear at funerals. "Rachel," she said, guiding me by the elbow like I was 90 years old, "can we chat in private?" She took me into a side room, not my office, because, as I would soon find out, it was no longer my office. Carla shut the door behind us, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them over her tablet. "I fought this," she said. "I swear I did. But the board voted unanimously. Ethan has legal control now." I stared at her, not understanding. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice coming out hoarse and dry, like I hadn't spoken in weeks. "There was a reassignment," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Backdated authorization while you were under medical care. The convertible note round triggered conversion, and your majority status fell below the board threshold." I blinked, the words failing to connect in any rational sequence. What do you mean fell below? You're at 14.2% now, Rachel. You don't control anything." The meeting that followed was short. Ethan arrived 15 minutes late with a folder tucked under his arm and a glass of green juice in his hand. He looked every bit the polished executive, shirt pressed, hair styled, voice so calm it grated against every nerve I had left. "You look great," he said. "Rest really suits you." He opened the folder and pushed a letter across the table toward me. It was already signed. "This is just a formality," he said. "We've decided to move forward without you as CEO." I couldn't breathe. "You mean temporarily," I said, my hand refusing to touch the letter. "Until I'm cleared." He tilted his head with that smug half-smile I had once mistaken for charm. "Rachel, this company has outgrown your bandwidth. You've done incredible work. But your energy it's not aligned anymore. You've lost your edge." That was the third flag, the one that broke me. In the days that followed, I fell into a kind of psychic freefall. I spent hours pacing my apartment, my fingers raw from refreshing inboxes that stayed silent. My name disappeared from the website completely. When I called the lawyer who had drafted our founding documents, she sounded apologetic but distant. "I wish I could help," she said. "But everything looks clean on paper. You signed off on the transfer. It's legal." I screamed into my pillow that night, the sound muffled and feral. I hadn't just lost my company. I had lost my identity. For 5 years, Wellnest had been my skin, my lungs, my heartbeat, and now it belonged to someone who called it a brand asset. Ethan started appearing on podcasts. On TechCrunch, he said, "Mental health has always been important to us, but it needs leadership that's grounded, objective, and scalable." When asked about my absence, he smiled gently and said, "Rachel's taking some time for herself. We support that." As if I had chosen to walk away. As if I had folded myself up neatly and placed myself in a drawer. The silence that followed was a unique kind of violence. Most of my former team members didn't reach out. I later learned that Ethan had issued a quiet internal directive discouraging contact, citing ongoing legal sensitivities. Carla texted me twice, once to check in, once to apologize, but when I asked her to lunch, she declined. "I wish I could, Rach. But I can't risk my options." I didn't blame her. Even my mother's voice turned strange when I told her. "Maybe this is for the best," she said softly, as if soothing a child after a tantrum. "You were so stressed all the time. Now you can focus on your health." "My health is not the problem," I snapped, but she only sighed. "You were trying to do too much, honey. You can't carry the world." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself not to scream. For months, I wandered through a kind of emotional purgatory. I stopped attending industry events. I muted Ethan's name on social media. I ignored my inbox entirely. There was no point answering emails when your name was no longer on the masthead. And yet, I couldn't stop watching. Every new product release, every polished interview, every congratulatory post from a VC who had once told me I was too young to be taken seriously, but now praised Ethan's clear vision. I watched it all, as if pressing my hand against a window I could no longer break through. My apartment became a cave. Dishes piled up in the sink. Dead plants littered the windowsill. I lost 15 pounds without noticing. My therapist suggested medication. I nodded. I didn't fill the prescription. Then, one afternoon, it happened by accident. I was cleaning out a desk drawer looking for a lost charger when I found it, an old flash drive, still labeled wellness_IP_2019. Curious, I plugged it in. The folder contained the original codebase of our platform, the early UI mockups, the beta test reports, but more importantly, something I had completely forgotten. It contained the notarized transfer document for intellectual property, the one I'd drafted before we sought funding. And it was unsigned. I checked the date. I checked the version number. I opened the PDF again. The legal IP for Wellness's core platform, its algorithms, the source code, the early design infrastructure, it was still under my name. Legally, personally, fully. My hands started to shake. I opened the original contract terms. Read every line. Ethan had assumed I'd signed it. So had the lawyers. So had everyone. But I hadn't. I had insisted on holding onto the IP until the Series A closed. Then I'd collapsed. Then he'd moved on without checking. He didn't own the core. I did. Revenge is loud. But reclamation? Reclamation is quiet. It happens in small decisions and long silences. It is built, not thrown. It took me nearly a full year after discovering that unsigned IP document to even begin feeling like a person again, let alone someone capable of rebuilding anything. For months, I kept that flash drive in a fireproof box beneath my bed, as though proximity to its contents might accidentally summon the strength I had once wielded so effortlessly. It didn't. Not right away. I wish I could say I roared back into the world with a vengeance, standing tall and vowing justice. The truth was much slower, much smaller, and so painfully human. I took long walks at dawn because it was the only hour when the city didn't ask anything of me. I reread the foundational texts on business and mental health not to feel smart, but because they were the only things I had once loved that hadn't betrayed me. I cleaned my apartment like it was a ritual, like each scrubbed corner might undo some part of the shame. It was during one of those endless gray afternoons, while reorganizing my digital files for the third time that week, that I stumbled across a name I hadn't thought about in years: Adam Torres. Adam had been an early investor, not in Wellnest itself, but in me. He had believed in my vision when it was still just post-it notes and ramen-fueled wireframes. He had quietly walked away from Ethan's leadership 2 years after my removal, citing irreconcilable differences in direction. At the time, I was too hurt to reach out, too embarrassed. But now I needed perspective that wasn't tainted by grief. I found his number buried in an old email thread. I typed and retyped a message for an hour before settling on something simple. Adam, this is Rachel Lynn. I know it's been a while. I could use your insight, if you're open to it. He replied within 15 minutes, name the time and place. I've been waiting for this message for years. We met at a quiet coffee shop tucked between 2 bookstores on a side street in Silver Lake. Adam looked older, more grounded, like someone who had seen the best and worst of people and learned how to live between them. He didn't ask for a recap. He didn't demand an explanation. He just listened as I laid out everything: my collapse, Ethan's maneuvering, the IP I still legally owned. When I finished, I expected pity. Maybe even frustration at how long I had waited to act. Instead, Adam leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. So now the question is, what do you want to build? Not to prove something, but because it's yours. That sentence echoed in my head for weeks. With Adam's guidance, I began sketching out a new vision, not a revenge project, but a return to my core values. I didn't want venture capital. I didn't want glossy offices or press junkets. I wanted a product that quietly helped people, that reached those who were often forgotten by sleek mental health platforms designed for the affluent. I called it Pneuma, after the Latin word for breath, for soul. It was a private, low-cost platform offering trauma-informed coaching and self-guided therapeutic content, especially targeted toward marginalized communities and women rebuilding after burnout. We launched quietly, no fanfare, no founders' letters, no staged photos. I built a team of 5, lean, brilliant, and deeply human. Carla was not one of them. Not yet. I focused on what mattered: integrity, impact, and ownership. The first 1,000 users came slowly, word-of-mouth referrals from small therapy groups, social workers, and women's shelters. The next 10,000 came faster. By year 3, we had partnerships with 5 major healthcare providers who had once rejected Wellnest for being too unproven. Meanwhile, I watched Ethan's new leadership implode in slow motion. Without the foundational vision that had animated every corner of Wellnest, the company started veering toward commercial partnerships that looked good on paper but gutted the soul of the product. They pivoted toward corporate wellness packages, alienating the very users who had made the platform viable. Reviews began to suffer. Team morale declined. Innovators left. Leadership reshuffled 3 times in 2 years. Ethan gave interview after interview, talking in buzzwords so hollow they could echo. And then, the real mistake happened. They released a new feature set, adaptive coaching paths, powered by original AI models. The demo looked familiar. Too familiar. I downloaded the app. I reverse-engineered the code with the help of a friend at UCLA. It was mine. My algorithms. My architecture. The exact signature I had designed in year one of Wellnest. And that was the fatal flaw, because Ethan had never secured legal rights to my IP. He had assumed the silence meant surrender. He was wrong. Filing the suit was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Not because I didn't have the evidence, not because I was afraid of the courtroom, but because it meant coming back into the spotlight. It meant being seen again, not as a cautionary tale, not as the founder who burned out, but as someone who had been erased and was now speaking. My lawyers crafted a quiet, precise IP claim, not for damages, not for punitive compensation, but for acknowledgement and legal return of my property. We filed through a sealed motion in California Superior Court. No press release. No public statements, just the facts. Ethan didn't respond personally. His general counsel did. 6 weeks later, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Carla. We met at a tiny diner halfway between my apartment and the Wellnest office she had just been escorted out of. She looked tired, lighter somehow. She slid a manila folder across the table and said, "I know I'm late. I'm sorry." Inside were internal memos, Slack transcripts, and a timeline of decision-making that painted a clear picture. Ethan had known about the IP discrepancy 6 months prior. He had ordered the dev team to clean the code instead of alerting legal. When several engineers raised red flags, he fired 2 of them. Carla had tried to push back. She had been silenced. Then she had been let go. "I never stopped believing in what you built," she said. I couldn't afford to leave when I should have. But if this helps, it's yours." It helped more than she knew. The arbitration hearing was short. Ethan's team offered a settlement before we even finished opening arguments. Their proposed terms were calculated: full transfer of the original IP back to me, a quiet rewrite of the company's narrative, and a cash buyout that would allow them to continue under a new product name, if I dropped the public claim and waived damages. My lawyer leaned toward me, whispering that this was better than we'd hoped for. That it was clean. That it was dignified. But as I stared at the paper, I felt a deep, unfamiliar weight settle over me. I wasn't sure if I wanted it back. Not like this. Not with my name appended to something that no longer reflected my values. I had built something new. Something whole. Did reclaiming Wellnest mean undoing all of that? The judge gave us until Monday. I didn't come back to reclaim a title. I came back to finish what I started, with both eyes open this time. On the Monday morning the judge had given me to decide, I stood in my apartment with the settlement letter in one hand and the Numa quarterly report in the other. The contrast between the 2 documents was staggering, not in financial weight, but in what they represented. One was sleek, typed in a serif font, every paragraph calculated to extinguish risk and rewrite the truth without bloodshed. The other was printed on recycled paper and filled with handwritten comments from our users. Women rebuilding after trauma, low-income families finally accessing care, survivors of burnout saying they felt seen. I spent hours weighing what it would mean to sign the settlement and accept control of Wellnest again. Not for revenge, not even for restitution, but because that company still held something sacred inside it. My origin. My pain. My purpose. It was born from a promise I made to myself at 26 years old, staring at my father's urn and vowing that no one like him would fall through the cracks if I had anything to say about it. And Wellnest, despite all that had happened, still mattered to thousands of users. They deserved better than the shell Ethan had turned it into. So I signed the papers, not with triumph, but with clarity. Ownership didn't mean going back. It meant going forward differently. 2 days later, I returned to the building I had once considered my second home. It had changed, but not enough to disguise its bones. The receptionist recognized me, though she tried to pretend she didn't. The elevator ride to the 5th floor felt shorter than I remembered, and yet every second stretched across the last decade like a bridge of fire. Ethan was waiting in the glass conference room, wearing the same blazer he wore on the cover of Founder's Digest, back when they called him the compassionate disruptor. The irony didn't even sting anymore. Just floated past me like background noise. "Rachel," he said, standing too fast, his smile strained and nervous. "You look like someone who's been through something and won." I didn't return the smile. "I didn't win, Ethan," I said, setting my folder on the table. "I just refused to lose the one thing I built that still had a pulse." He nodded, hands in his pockets. I know this doesn't mean much now, but I really did try to keep it alive. After you left, I wasn't gone, I interrupted. I was erased. There's a difference. He paused, eyes flicking toward the glass like he was calculating his next move. I made mistakes, but I believed in it. In you. That's the problem, I said, my voice level. You believed in me the way people believe in a mascot, charming and expendable. He looked stung, but not surprised. So what now? Now, I said, pulling out a new letterhead with a different name entirely, we start again. The merger was quiet but radical. I brought Wellnest and Numa under one new umbrella, Lumina. Not just a rebrand, but a recommitment, to truth, to equity, to care that wasn't just performative. I didn't want a redemption arc. I wanted revolution by integrity. The first order of business was gutting the board. Every legacy investor who had sat silently during my ousting was replaced, some by force, others through strategic buyouts Adam helped me orchestrate. I created a women-led governance council made up of licensed therapists, patient advocates, and founders who had been burned by the startup machine. Their job wasn't to rubber stamp strategy. It was to hold us accountable. Adam returned, not as a shadow advisor, but as a guiding voice who reminded me, every week, that the goal wasn't scale, but soul. Carla became our COO. Her first day, she brought homemade muffins to the all-hands and stood in front of the staff without notes or pretense. I helped build a system that erased someone I respected, she said. I'm here to build a system that does the opposite. People clapped, some cried. And for the first time since my return, I felt something close to peace. 3 weeks into the transition, I sat down to write a letter, one not to investors or lawyers, but to the public. I called it a letter to the woman I was at 26. I wrote it at 3 a.m., barefoot on my balcony, laptop balanced on my knees, coffee going cold beside me. I didn't hold back. I talked about burnout, about betrayal, about the way women are taught to give until there's nothing left and then still apologize for being tired. I named what happened without venom. I told the truth in plain English. I ended it with a line that had lived in my chest for years, waiting for release. I survived losing my company, my health, and my voice. Not because I was strong, but because I finally let go of needing to be. The letter went viral within 48 hours. Women from every industry wrote back, CEOs, teachers, nurses, founders, cashiers. Some had built businesses. Some had just left toxic jobs. All of them had a version of my story in their bones. We created a digital wall in our new headquarters, covered from floor to ceiling with excerpts from those messages. Not as marketing. As witness. Not everything healed. I visited my mother on a Sunday afternoon, the light warm and soft across her garden. She offered me tea the same way she always had, as if our last conversation hadn't ended in silence. I read your letter, she said, pouring jasmine into the same chipped mug I used in high school. I nodded. It was honest, she added. Braver than I've ever been. There was a pause. I thought I was protecting you, she said quietly. From disappointment. From believing in something too much. I needed belief, I said, not unkindly. Not protection that looked like silence. We didn't cry. We didn't hug. But we understood each other better in that moment than we had in 20 years. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was closure. The final scene I'll give you isn't a headline or a pitch meeting. It's me, walking the halls of our new building, formerly Wellnest, now Lumina. Its walls painted in soft earth tones, the lighting warm, the air carrying faint notes of eucalyptus and lavender. Not because it's trendy, but because sensory care is real. There are no founders' portraits. Instead, each room is named after a person we helped, first names only, written in delicate silver script beside a short quote. Ari's room, this place made me believe I wasn't broken. Jamila's hall, for the first time, someone listened. Tomas' wing, you caught me in time. I walk those halls every week, not as a CEO in heels but in sneakers and a cardigan, clipboard in hand, checking on couches and light dimmers, asking people if the space feels safe. Sometimes I stop in the quietest room, my father's name on the door. It's not for public tours, just for me. Paul's room, he never got the help. But maybe someone else will. And that's why I came back. Not to undo the past, but to write the future in my own handwriting.